In this video, we'll exegetically uncover what exactly Ham's sin was, and why did Noah curse Canaan instead of him. Reminder to hit the subscribe button below and turn on the notification bell to stay up to date as new videos come out. And if you're interested in supporting this ministry, just go to justscripture.org and click on the support page. The drunken Noah episode at the end of Genesis 9 has puzzled many theologians and rabbis over the centuries. The debate focuses primarily over two interrelated questions. One, what exactly was Ham's sin? And two, why was Canaan, Ham's fourth son, cursed because of it? Since Ham committed the sin worthy of a curse, then why is his fourth son receiving it and not Ham himself? These are fair and good questions to ask. And because Moses felt that this story was worthy of being penned into the Torah, that we need to think initially that this story bears some front-end weight to the larger narrative of the Old Testament. Now, before diving into the text, we should be aware of the three main views that are out there today. First is that of voyeurism. I like to call this the Nelson Muntz view. Nelson always points and laughed at others' misfortunes. So it's fitting because voyeurism explains it that this is what Ham's sin was. His looking and mocking at his inebriated father and going to tell his brother was so disrespectful in the ancient Near East customs that he was worthy of receiving a curse, but somehow it got down to his fourth son. We could also call this the traditional or classical view because this view has held dominance within the church since Augustine and even within some Jewish circles. The next is that of castration. The explanation here is that Ham went into Noah's tent and castrated his blacked-out father as some form of rebellion. This you'll see in some rabbinic literature. And the third one is of that of incest. Here it is typically explained that Ham raped his father as a means of usurping the patriarchal rank over the family, which at this point was basically, the whole world. But as we examine these views, we are looking for what the text actually reveals and which coherently answers why Canaan received the curse and not Ham. So let's buzz through our 11 verses, then come back and exegetically break it down. And the sons of Noah that went forth of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Ham is the father of Canaan. These are the three sons of Noah, and of them was the whole earth overspread. And Noah began to be a husbandman, and planted a vineyard. And he drank of the wine, and was drunken, and he was uncovered within his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and told his two brothers outside. And Shem and Japheth took a garment, and laid it upon both their shoulders, and went backward, and covered the nakedness of their father, and their faces were backward, and they saw not their father's nakedness. And Noah awoke from his wine, and knew what his younger son had done unto him. And he said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. And he said, Blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. And Noah lived after the flood 350 years, and all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. The good thing is that the last two verses have no bearing on this, so we can whack those two right off. Something that you might not have noticed before was that 2 times Moses informed us that Ham is the father of Canaan. This repetition is obviously intentional and primes the reader that Canaan is directly connected with Ham's sin somehow. Because at this point in the post-flood world, you have Ham with his first 3 sons being born, then Canaan is born as his 4th son. And since Arphaxad was born 2 years after the flood, and he's Shem's 3rd son, you know that at least 3 of Shem's 5 sons are already around, and most likely a few of Japheth's 7 sons were already born before Canaan too. And this makes sense since the first thing after the flood subsided was that God blessed Noah and his sons and said unto them, "Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth." So they're doing exactly what God instructed them to do in repopulating the earth. So with this understanding, we know that Canaan is somehow directly tied to Ham's sin. If Canaan isn't directly connected to Ham's sin, then there's no justification for Grandpa pronouncing a curse on him while all his older brothers, and Dad especially for that matter, getting a free pass. So with that in mind, you can already see some problems with the Nelson Muntz view. Because regardless of how disrespectful Ham's mocking of his naked, inebriated father was, that Canaan would have absolutely no direct connection to Ham's sin. So, how did the classicists try to maintain this view, though? Well, Luther said because the curse actually went to Ham. In his commentary on Genesis, he said, "But there is another reason for this repeatedly uttered curse. God cannot forget such great irreverence towards parents, nor does he suffer it to go unpunished. Ham is cursed by his father, but he lays hold upon the great portion of the earth and established vast kingdoms. On the other hand, Shem and Japheth are blessed, but in comparison with Ham, they and their posterity are beggarly." Only one giant problem with this. Noah said, "Cursed be Canaan," and repeats it twice more that Canaan is the one that receives the curse. Now Calvin didn't try to spin it that way. He said, "In the meanwhile, Ham, by reproachable laughing at his father," so you can see the voyeurism here, "it is asked in the first place, why Noah, instead of pronouncing the curse upon his son, inflicts the severity of punishment which that son had deserved upon his innocent grandson, since it seems not consistent with the justice of God to visit the crimes of parents upon their children." But the answer is well known, namely that God, although he pursues his course of judgments upon the sons and the grandchildren of the ungodly, yet in being angry with them is not angry with the innocent, because even they themselves are at fault. Another question is also proposed, namely, why among the many sons of Ham, God chooses one to be smitten? But let not our curiosity here indulge itself too freely. Sorry, John, that is just a word salad of an answer to try to avoid the logical conclusion that if Canaan was the one that is cursed because of Ham's looking and mocking, that it makes Noah, and by extension God, look capricious in their judgments. So what's to be gained here from eliminating voyeurism? Simply put, it shows that we can't always filter our theology through church tradition. If we're going to advocate for sola scriptura, then actually stick to that. And the other is that this is not a Sunday school lesson to express to kids why they need to honor thy father and thy mother. So, if it comes up in your church's curriculum, then you do what every good teacher does, that you simply make a good, valid point about getting drunk leads to a lot of problems, and that we always need to respect our parents, even in their misfortunes. But at that point, you just simply turn the page and go right into chapter 10. But I can hear some of the diehards out there thinking, yeah, but verse 22 says that Ham saw the nakedness of his father, and verse 23 said Shem and Japheth saw not the father's nakedness. So what else could seeing mean? True, it appears that way at first glance, but the key here is the whole phrase that Ham saw the nakedness of his father. Because in verse 24, Noah is said to have known what Ham had done unto him. If Ham merely looked at him and mocked his dad, then how would Noah know that Ham had done something to him if he was just passed out drunk in the tent? Or, at minimal, extremely intoxicated to the level of Frank the Tank going streaking in the streets. So, you can see how voyeurism breaks down even on the front end. Now, this doesn't definitively rule it out yet, but without question, this interpretation doesn't answer the key questions coherently and thus is really just a non-explanation. So you can see that verse 24 appears to allude to some type of sexual violation that was committed by Ham against his father. Now, the castration view can be found in the Babylonian Talmud. It says, "And Noah awoke from his wine, and knew what his younger son had done unto him." With respect to the last verse, Rob and Samuel differ, one maintaining that he castrated him, while the other says that he sexually abused him. So you can see both the castration and paternal incest view are discussed within this piece. Sticking to the castration portion though, it says, "He who maintains that he is castrated reasons thus. Since he cursed him by his fourth son, he must have injured him with respect to a fourth son." So, the rabbi is saying that the deduction here is that Noah cursed Canaan as Ham's fourth son because Ham's sin prevented Noah from having a fourth son by castrating him. The view continues, saying, "Now, on the view that he emasculated him, it is right that he cursed him by his fourth son." 3 problems with this. First, chronologically, Noah already had 100 years before the flood and a handful of years post-flood to have had a fourth son before Ham had possibly castrated him. Second is that nothing in the text describes castration taking place. And third, the rationale for Canaan being cursed just because he's the fourth son is not justifiable. He has absolutely no direct connection into this narrative with this interpretation. So, the castration view doesn't hold up to any type of scrutiny. Which now brings us to the incest view. Its footing is in verse 24 that says that Ham had done something to Noah while he was drunk and naked in the tent. The textual support for this lies not on the surface level of verse 22, where it says that Ham just saw the nakedness of his father, but that to see nakedness is actually an idiom for sexual intercourse. This can be found numerous times in Leviticus 18 and 20 and in Ezekiel 16, 23, and 23. Leviticus 18:6 says, "None of you shall approach to any that is near of kin to him to uncover their nakedness. I am the Lord." You can easily tell that the Lord is not merely telling Israel that they can't go near their relatives. He's telling them that incest is wrong, and instead of saying it in blunt, graphic terms, he expressed it as to uncover someone's nakedness. Verse 7, "The nakedness of thy father, or the nakedness of thy mother, shalt thou not uncover. She is thy mother, thou shalt not uncover her nakedness." So you can see how the phrase, "nakedness of thy father," becomes an idiomatic phrase for sexual intercourse. Now I can understand that the mere thought of this makes a person want to go hug a toilet, or at least go running back to voyeurism for their view to avoid any nightmares from taking place. But I promise you that it will get a little bit better, well, maybe not a whole lot, and there will actually come some good clarity as to why Ham did what he did and Canaan's prophetic role in this whole thing. So back to Leviticus 18. Overviewing verses 9 through 19, you see that uncovering nakedness is used over and over again to warn the Israelite men who not to sleep with. But you might be thinking, yeah, I'm starting to see this, but verse 22 said, "saw the nakedness, not uncovered nakedness," like Leviticus 18. That's a keen eye, and that's why we need to go to Leviticus 20:17. And if a man shall take his sister, his father's daughter, or his mother's daughter, and see her nakedness, and she see his nakedness, it is a wicked thing. And they shall be cut off in the sight of their people. He hath uncovered his sister's nakedness, he shall bear his iniquity. So you can see that to see nakedness is the same as uncovering nakedness. And Ezekiel 100% solidifies the sexual nature of this as he railed against Jerusalem, calling her a harlot, a fornicator, a whore, an adulteress, that is all tied with her nakedness, and that God will judge her as a woman who breaks wedlock. So voyeurism is now completely ruled out. To see nakedness is the same as uncovering nakedness, as both are idiom for sexual intercourse. And because of verse 24, proponents of the incest view say that this was paternal raping as to usurp Noah's patriarchal authority over the family. That would give us probable cause as to why Ham committed such a heinous act, but in what way is Canaan involved as to warrant him receiving the curse and not Ham? There is none. And the Talmudic writer understood this as well. So, even though the paternal incest view can have a strong textual case built up for it, it still fails the second test on why Canaan received the curse instead of Ham himself. Now, I can imagine some of you have breathed in a sigh of relief that Ham didn't rape his dad. So now what? Because it seems like we're kind of out of viewpoints now. Well, that's not quite so. There's one more option out there that you might have never heard about, and that is the maternal incest view. Yes, it was mom and not dad who Ham raped. That's better? Yeah, in terms of the Richter scale, you gotta go from a 10.0 down to, say, 9.9. Either way, it makes you want to drink an entire bottle of Pepto and go hog the toilet. Regardless of how disgusting this idea is, though, how does one arrive with the maternal incest view when nowhere in the narrative was mom ever mentioned, or any female for that matter? Well, we saw how Leviticus 20:17 made to see nakedness synonymous with uncovering nakedness. And the same can be done with the nakedness of his father, because going back to Leviticus 18, we see in verse 7 that both the nakedness of thy father and mother are in the same line, and it continues saying, shalt thou not uncover, she is thy mother. Thou shalt not uncover her nakedness. See how this is focusing on not having sexual intercourse with mom? Which leads us to verse 8 saying, the nakedness of thy father's wife shalt thou not uncover. It is thy father's nakedness. Moses just equated mother's nakedness with father's nakedness. They're one and the same. Which is why the NIV renders verse 7 saying, do not dishonor your father by having sexual relations with your mother. So, she is your mother, do not have relations with her. And the ESV and the NASB and many other versions equate the nakedness of the father with the mother in the verse. And when you go back to Ezekiel 22, you see father's nakedness is always associated with sexual intercourse with women. And if you glance at Ezekiel 23, you can see that nakedness is only used in context with female intercourse. And now, launching us all the way back to Leviticus 18, all of those with the nakedness scenarios laid out deal with females. But when you get to verse 22, that prohibits homosexual intercourse, that nakedness is no longer used. And even in Leviticus 20:13, that prohibits homosexuality as well, it never uses uncovering nakedness. But immediately starts using it again when describing intercourse with females that are near of kin. So the maternal incest view holds up exegetically. And what could have made this easier for everyone to spot was if verse 21's his tent was translated her tent, because in Hebrew it ends with a third feminine singular suffix, and you can easily compare this to Genesis 24:67, with Isaac taking Rebekah into his deceased mother's tent to take her as his wife. But whose tent it was doesn't really matter, because everyone was pretty inebriated from drinking all the wine, and the main point is that Ham uncovered the nakedness of his mother. So, what ties Canaan directly into this story? Well, it's that Canaan is the offspring of Ham's raping of his mother. And when Noah finds out what happens, that he curses the offspring of this illicit, unholy union, which is consistent with the other two illicit unions in the Genesis narratives. The first one you had was back in Genesis 6:1-4, with the sons of God taking the daughters of men that produce the Nephilim. The third one was with Lot and his two daughters that produced the Moabites and the Ammonites. So when you compare our current narrative to the other ones, that you see how it coherently ties in together with them. And you could say that these first two illicit stories form an inclusio around the flood narrative, as they are the starting and ending stories to Noah's story in the biblical account. In comparing the latter two, you can see how these two have the same motif of drunken episodes and incest involved that produced evil nations that were a thorn in Israel's side throughout the entire Old Testament period. So, with this, it becomes easily understandable why Moses mentioned Ham, that he was the father of Canaan twice, and the second time in conjunction with seeing the nakedness of his father. But why did Ham go tell his brothers what he did? Because he was declaring that I have usurped Dad's authority as the head patriarch of the family, which is the whole world at this point. In the ancient world, this is part of how a person claimed and even solidified their rulership by taking the wives and concubines of others. The first one mentioned is Reuben and Bilhah, Jacob's concubine. Then you have three examples in the house of David. The most well-known one is David's son Absalom, who tried to usurp the throne. 15:16 says that David left 10 of his concubines behind, but then in 16:21, Absalom's advisor said that if he went into all the concubines, that all of Israel would now get behind him. Which then, in 16:22, it says that Absalom did so in the sight of all Israel on top of the house. What you might not have caught, though, 3 chapters before this, was that God told David that he gave him Saul's house and wives to unite the kingdom under his rulership and not of Ishbosheth's. I know this might sound odd to us today, but this is how you consolidate your rule and authority, and to make sure that no competitive seed rose up in opposition. And the last example is with Adonijah asking Bathsheba to ask King Solomon for one of David's widows to be his wife. To which Solomon knew what he was trying to do and sarcastically replied to his mom saying, "Gee, Mom, why don't you just ask for the kingdom for him as well?" So the maternal incest view offers us the most coherent answers as to what was actually taking place in this narrative. But I can imagine that some of you might have a couple of questions still out there to ask, like, well, what about verse 23 where Shem and Japheth walked backwards to cover the nakedness of their father with a garment? Well, if you think about it, just for a moment, it makes a lot more sense to have mom in there instead of dad. Let's just be adults here for a moment. What's worse, man? To accidentally walk into the bathroom on dad or mom? Enough said. So everything the boys did here was of 100% complete opposite action of that of their brother. And they were likely very saddened by their terrible evil action that their brother just did, and were just trying to be good sons by covering up their parents' disgraceful situation. Now, you might be still asking, what about Noah sobering up, finding out what happened, and then belting out a curse on Canaan? And, let's say, did all this really just happen the next day after a morning pot of coffee? And how could Noah even know if his wife was pregnant or not? It's not like they had, pregnancy tests back then. And, it kind of seems like Canaan's already born and on the scene, but yet Noah still curses him directly? So the big question here is, how is all of this reconcilable in real time? Those are all good weedy type questions to ask and we need to think about. So let's get on the ground level here. If all of this is taking place, say, the next day, then Noah would have been told by his other sons and his wife what happened while he was blacked out. He then could assume that she was pregnant because of God's blessing upon his family after the flood to be fruitful and multiply by repopulating the earth. Or simply that this was part of Noah's received prophetic insight because verse 25 is part of his prophetic announcement of how things will play out with the descendants of Canaan, Shem, and Japheth. And we know that Noah is in this moment working with the Spirit because the course of history has showed this to be exactly the case. So, in that moment, Noah named this child accordingly because the name Canaan is rooted from the word kana, that means to be humbled, subdued, or brought low, likened to subjugation, i.e., a servant of servants. When you think about the context of the matter, and then you compare it to Noah's prophecy about his 3 sons' descendants, that all of this makes a whole lot of sense now together. Because Ham was essentially after the throne, and that through Canaan's line that his posterity would carry the rulership of all future nations. But Noah offered a 180-degree prophecy against that plan. He announces to Ham that this son will never be a ruler or even be great, but he'll be small and even a servant of servants. And that Shem will carry on the promised seed line blessing, and that Japheth will be enlarged. So I hope you can see how Noah is completely flipping the script here on Ham. But you still might be thinking, I can see that, but where exactly is Ham's punishment in this matter? It kind of still seems like Canaan is the one receiving the brunt end of the stick. Well, think about it from another light. What is worse, when you suffer, or when your children suffer, or say even your grandchildren suffer? This secondhand punishment on Ham is hitting him hard. It's hitting him hard mentally, spiritually, and even physically, because in verse 24, Noah referred to Ham as his younger son, which means in the context, not the youngest son like chronologically speaking, but small in number and insignificant when compared to his brothers. So Ham was getting told by Noah that, hey, you and everybody underneath you is going to be small and insignificant compared to your 2 brothers' lines. So Noah was telling Ham that his posterity will be the smallest in terms of size and strength, while his 2 brothers' descendants will be more abundant and blessed. Now, the only thing that I can think that could still be possibly theologically troubling you is that Noah said, "Cursed be Canaan," and that somehow this curse is an automatic hell sentence to Noah's grandson and to all the descendants that would come from him. That's simply not the case. just because someone was born a Canaanite didn't mean that they were out of luck their entire life, because this is somehow some everlasting perpetual hell sentence curse that no one could be freed from. And I'll give you one simple example to dispel this type of thinking. Uriah the Hittite. The Hittites came from Canaan's son Heth, and this family tree ultimately stretches down to King David's most loyal soldier, Uriah, who was a descendant of Canaan. So this curse is really about the general future outworking of the Canaanite nations, and not just Noah's unborn grandson. Paul told the Athenians, and us, that God made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way towards Him and find Him. Reminder to hit the subscribe button below, turn on the notification bell, hit the like button, and leave a comment. And don't forget to visit us at justscripture.org. But in the meantime, stay salty.